Alfred, Big Nasty Kunawa, Dateline, September 7th, 2015. It is Air Force Day. It's Independence Day in Brazil. It's Military Intelligence Day. And it's National Acorn Squash Day. And it's National Beer Lovers Day. Really? What am I doing here? It's National Salami Day. It's National Threatened Species Day. It's Victory Day. And oh yes, it is Labor Day in the United States of America. These United States of America. Always remember to subscribe to PodNasty on iTunes and YouTube. Listen to PodNasty on SoundCloud and Stitcher. Oh, what a week. What a week. I mean, you do a very buzzy interview with Virgil about F-word money, and that is the least controversial thing that happened since I did the last show. By the way, I love that interview. Again, the views and thoughts expressed by Virgil are not reflective of PodNasty. I just liked your responses to it. It ranged from, man, how's this guy still relevant? Why is his name in the news? To, wow, that was hilarious, which I thought it was. I loved Virgil's responses. We got to have him on the show in person, and that is something that I promise I will try to do. But Virgil's a busy man. I mean, it is easier for me to get Seth Rollins, WWE champion, on this show than Virgil. Think about that. But since we last spoke, a lot has gone down. We've had more racial controversy. We've had Hulk Hogan resurface. We've had a John Cena injury scare. I mean, what haven't we had? Zahra Schreiber, Seth Rollins' girlfriend, she gone. Twitter uncovered her not-so-delicate past, apparently celebrating Nazi symbols. She defended it by saying she's a history buff who just happens to like swastikas. I think they've got a name for people like that, but I digress. Listen, I've said it before, I'll say it again. WWE has zero tolerance for public scandal. And if you are a developmental talent like Zahra Schreiber, who nobody really knows, you cannot afford to have this type of controversy follow you around. Remember, this is a girl who was directly implicated in the Seth Rollins nude photo scandal, where nude photos of her surfaced as well as Seth Rollins. So she already had one strike against her, and you got to believe that Seth Rollins' position in the company allowed her to keep her job. But now this is just too much, and WWE has zero tolerance for public scandal. She's not gone because necessarily specifically the racist element. She's not gone because of the anti-Semitic element. She's gone because of all the public scandal she created and because of how expendable she was. Hulk Hogan was in the same position. I know he's Hulk Hogan. But this era of Hulk Hogan in the millennial generation really cannot contribute to WWE the way he could in the 80s and 90s. He's just a name. He's an ambassador. He's not a wrestler. He's not going to make a difference in pay-per-view. So for him to say what he said, those egregious things, it was a no-brainer for WWE to release him. And we saw him on Good Morning America, very, very apologetic, as you would expect. And again, it'll only be a matter of time before he's back, in my mind, provided he stays healthy and hopefully alive. I really do see Hulk Hogan back in a year or two. And as a black person, I really don't find Hulk Hogan to be the number one target in this entire operation, in this entire scandal. I really do think WWE's culture that it's created has fostered an environment where it's easier to exhibit this type of behavior. And it's unfortunate. But, this is not the first behind-the-scenes racist incident we've seen with somebody from professional wrestling naming WWE, and it's not the last. It's certainly not the last. It's been a tough year, tough couple of years for the 80s generation. Whether they've passed on before their time, whether they've been involved in some kind of scandal, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage's untimely death, Roddy Piper's untimely death, Dusty Rhodes, Greg Valentine making sexist comments. Where did that come from? It's like every major star from the 80s has either passed on or severely tarnished their legacy. I mean, how do you feel if you grew up with these guys? Ultimate Warrior gone. I mean, it's horrible. And now Jimmy Snuka, another pillar of the 80s, will have a murder trial against his ex-girlfriend reopened. This is a man who's in his 70s. His lawyer claims that he's suffering from dementia and may not be able to testify. This is a case that could land him in prison for the rest of his life. And it's really sad. It's another black eye for the 80s generations of wrestlers. I don't know what's going to come out of this, but they obviously feel that they have enough evidence to reopen this case, which was a big scandal decades ago, but eventually went away and in favor of Jimmy Snuka. But now they've got a second shot at him. And the way the evidence is piling up, it sounds like there is a chance that Jimmy Snuka could be found guilty. Snuka is being charged with third-degree murder stemming from an alleged involuntary manslaughter in 1983, which resulted in the demise of his ex-girlfriend. And accordingly, WWE has already begun the process of wiping him away from their Hall of Fame on WWE.com, erasing mentions of him on their website and in programming. So he will likely be persona non grata for quite some time. If he's eventually found guilty, maybe even longer. But even if he's innocent, the fact that he's at the end of his life, and this may be how he's remembered, this is like the last thing he'll be in the news for, it'll be a while before WWE probably liberally mentions Jimmy Snuka. It'll be a while before you see that clip of him jumping off the top of a steel cage, which is one of the most iconic scenes in WWE history. One of the most iconic wrestlers in WWE history, John Cena, suffered an injury scare this past weekend at live events. If you saw the injury, it looked scary. It looked like one of those non-contact football injuries when you immediately know that he's going to be gone for a long time. Because Cena, the way he went awkwardly down in a sunset flip and just got up and kind of collapsed. Like he got knocked out, like maybe it was a neck injury that he was just stunned, like it was a stinger or something. So when I saw it, I thought, man, this looks bad. This looks like it could be career ending. This does not look good at all. But John Cena, being the Superman he is fine. Apparently back on the road. WWE said he's okay, and he's expected to be at Raw. You know what's crazy is that John Cena, for a couple years now, has been positioned more or less as a mid-carder, as somebody who's a gatekeeper for mid-card wrestlers. But still, the idea of John Cena being gone for a long time would be crippling to WWE. He's still selling a lot of merchandise. He still leads WWE superstars in merchandise. If you go on the best sellers on WWEshop.com, he owns the majority of the items that are best sellers. John Cena is still a very big part of WWE, even though you can see them moving on from him. Even though Seth Rollins is positioned as a world champion, they've got a youth movement going on, John Cena is still that guy. So the idea of him being hurt, just, you could feel the fear and panic and like, well, what is WWE going to do if they don't have him for a long extended period of time? If you look at the last time John Cena was injured, obviously, we saw when he was gone on Raw with his broken nose. When he was gone for that week, getting surgery, the Raw rating actually went up a little bit. But that's because Brock Lesnar was on the show. If you look at the last time John Cena missed significant time in 2013, when he tore his triceps, that 8-9 week period, WWE Raw ratings plummeted to a year low. And when he came back, they rebounded significantly. So John Cena is still very much a part of WWE. He's still ingrained in that culture. The kids still line up to buy his merchandise. And it's going to be that way until they find a top babyface replacement for him. Because heels aren't going to sell merchandise. Seth Rollins, even though he's positioned at the top of the company right now, is not selling merchandise. Even when it's knocking off John Cena merchandise. John Cena is going to move units in merchandise. John Cena continues to move units in ratings. John Cena still continues to be WWE's biggest star. And it was very apparent when you just kind of looked at the possibility of WWE being without John Cena for an extended period of time, I don't think they can afford to do that. Not in a transitional period where ratings in August were lower than they've been in 20 years. You know, with this youth movement at the top of the roster, with fans still getting acclimated to the Seth Rollins and Rusevs and Roman Reigns and Dean Ambrose, in this youth movement, the ratings are suffering. With John Cena in the mid-card, you look at the month of August, lowest the ratings have been in almost 20 years, since 96. So to have John Cena there is very important because fans have to just get used to different guys on top, but you got the pillar John Cena there to keep most of these fans engaged. So that there's still that icon, that dynasty inherent in WWE. Because they cannot afford to lose John Cena now. I will say this, though. Seth Rollins at the top of WWE is doing a great job. I think from a wrestling standpoint, from a character development standpoint, his promos are not all that bad. They're actually very good. I like Seth Rollins on top. And obviously PWI 500 does too, because Seth Rollins was named the number one wrestler in the world by PWI 500, which I've said for years I think is a ridiculous list. I don't think it's necessary to have a top 500 list. Why don't you just call it an almanac? Just call it an almanac. Do we really need a ranking of the 500 best wrestlers in the world? A top 500 list? Have you heard of anything so ridiculous? The NFL has a top 100 every year where they do the 100 greatest players. Can you imagine if that was a 500 greatest NFL players of 2014? Starting with 500. Long snapper for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you got the interviews, guys like, oh man, when it comes to long snapping of football, nobody does it better than Armpit Jeff, the long snapper for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, once you get past 350, you're reaching. Once you get into the 500s, these are guys who job to Ryback. Can we just cut this thing off at 100, at 50? Do we need 500 of the best wrestlers in the world? Oh, but Alfred, it really educates you on wrestlers from around the world and around the globe. And okay, then how come every year a WWE wrestler is number one? Every year, a WWE wrestler is number one, and usually WWE wrestlers command most of the top 10 spots. So clearly, this list is influenced by WWE as much as anything else. Stop it. Stop with the top 500 stuff already. But whatever that means to be number one on a top 500 list, Seth Rollins is that guy this year. It's funny because there's obviously, WWE really does like Roman Reigns, and you know, the worst kept secret in WWE is that Roman Reigns is being pegged as John Cena's heir apparent. But Roman Reigns is now settled into this mid-card position where he's kind of in purgatory with Dean Ambrose, and they're trying to relive their Shield days, and it's uncomfortable, and it's really not working. And fans, there was some resistance to Roman Reigns being the top guy when he won the Royal Rumble. You remember that. And so WWE seems to be cooling off on Roman Reigns and taking him back to the lab, so to speak, so that they can rebuild him. But in that time, Seth Rollins has actually developed. Seth Rollins is you can no longer consider him a transitional champion. He's that guy right now. This is not an experiment anymore. I mean, I can see Seth Rollins holding this title through the end of the year. He's going to wrestle twice at Night of Champions. And every single time out where he's been in a big match, he's risen to the occasion and had one of the, if not the best match on the show. Seth Rollins has developed into that bona fide heir apparent. Is he the top guy, poster boy for now? No. But this transition is starting to remind me of what WWE tried to do by having them go from Hogan to Luger, and it didn't quite work out. So they really went from Hogan to Hart. They went from the big, muscular, superhero guy to the more technically sound, smaller wrestler who did connect with fans in Bret Hart. That's what it looks like it's happening. It looks like it's going from John Cena, the superhero, to Seth Rollins, the mechanic. The guy who can have great matches with anybody. And for now, you know, if the Roman Reigns experiment doesn't work out, because that still feels like an experiment. Roman Reigns, the potential top guy, still feels like an experiment. And it's one that a lot of these loud, boisterous fans from the internet are going to try to prevent from happening. But if that doesn't work, Seth Rollins is ready to go as a top guy for years to come. Talked about Bret Hart. Man, is he going ham. Every time I see a Bret Hart interview, it's a different version of bitter Bret Hart getting mad at somebody. He criticized Seth Rollins for injuring John Cena, saying that, great wrestlers aren't supposed to injure people like that. He criticized Hulk Hogan, of course, pouring on Hogan, saying that that's how Hogan always was. He's a phony. He made unfortunate remarks about how Hogan was happy that Roddy Piper passed on, which I was just taken aback by. Bret Hart's still going after the Clique all these years later. Bret Hart would get angry at Dora the Explorer if she got a color wrong. That was very unprofessional of Dora to get. That was obviously the color purple, not green. She really needs to be better than that. She's got a whole generation of children that she's confusing. I love Bret Hart as a wrestler. I loved watching Bret Hart in the ring. It was magic. He is one of the greatest of all time, in the short discussion for being the greatest of all time. But man, has he developed into the bitter old wrestler. You would think that after the whole Montreal Screwjob thing was mended, after those fences were mended and him and Shawn Michaels hugged, you would think that Bret Hart would have just moved on to greener pastures and just been a little kinder and nicer, but he's same old Bret. In fact, I think he sounds more bitter now after the Montreal Screwjob thing was put to bed on national television by WWE. He sounds more bitter now than before. Because it's like now he has this relationship with WWE. Now he has all these media appearances that he's making. And with every appearance, he sounds more and more bitter. And I kind of understand. Bret Hart is going through a tough time now with all these colleagues of his passing on, unfortunately. Roddy Piper was as close as anybody. He was as close to Bret Hart as anybody was. So I think Bret's still dealing with that. And he's kind of lashing out a little bit. And I understand that. Because Bret and Roddy were like brothers. Bret Hart will tell you, him and Roddy were like brothers. Roddy Piper was like the honorary Hart member. He used to say all the time how he was cousins with Bret Hart and Owen Hart and all those guys. So Roddy's death is very hard for Bret Hart, and I think that's what's happening. He's taking it out on everybody else. And it's unfortunate, really. It's really unfortunate. You know what else is unfortunate is a Divas Revolution. How much of a flop has this been? Just for the rule. Listen, WWE's not cool. Admitting that you watch wrestling is not cool. You're not going to get a girl interested in you by saying, oh yeah, I watch professional wrestling. It's just not cool. It's a bastard child of entertainment. One particular reason, and I'm going to keep harping on this, is because wrestling doesn't really have a grasp on black culture. There's no black executives, limited black writers. There's no black board members. There's no black anything to really be the pulse of the black culture. So WWE has no idea, and black people determine what's cool in this country. Black culture determines what's cool in this country. Look at what beats WWE in the ratings every week. Love and Hip Hop. NFL's coming back. Gonna kill WWE. And NFL, Love and Hip Hop, stuff like that is huge and is very popular in black culture. And therefore, it dominates that younger demographic. That cool, young demographic. So WWE is not cool. You know, it is kind of cool. NXT. Their head writer is black. He kind of gets it. Who's NXT? One of their biggest stars. Sasha Banks. Appropriates black culture. The Boss. One of the biggest stars in WWE on the main roster. The New Day. Appropriating black culture. You notice a pattern here? Primetime players doing a great job. You notice a pattern? And the thing is, WWE on the main roster has really embraced this divas revolution, but they're not cool. So the more they say the term divas revolution, the lamer it sounds. It's like WWE now has its arms around this, and the star of the divas revolution is a divas revolution, and that's why it's not working. It's because WWE wants credit for putting women on television. What really is just supposed to be natural. Tennis doesn't want credit for putting Serena Williams on. Serena Williams goes out there and dominates. That's what she's supposed to do. It's expected. Ronda Rousey goes out there and dominates. UFC needs Ronda Rousey. They're not doing her a favor by putting her on television. WWE is coming off like somebody who's doing the divas a favor by putting them on television. And WWE is so uncool that the more they say Divas Revolution and tell you to watch this, the less cool it seems. You know why the Divas thing works in NXT? It's because it's not a revolution. It's because they're just going out there and wrestling. Having good matches. They're taking their time with these characters. They're developing them. And then they have the match. Simple storyline. You're an underdog. You need to beat this person, this person, this person to get a shot at the champion. Now you have a shot at the champion on a big stage. Go. And you set the stage and people are into it. And by the way, while NXT is doing almost everything right when it comes to women's wrestling, can we stop with the crying and hugging after matches at NXT TakeOver? Haven't we gotten past that yet? How come every time women have a great match at NXT TakeOver, they have to cry and hug like it's some big accomplishment? This feeds into that mentality that WWE thinks it's this novel thing for women to be wrestling, for women's sports to be this big deal. Women's sports has been a big deal for a long time. WWE is just late to the party, as usual. And in NXT, that mentality is apparent. Because after every great match at NXT TakeOver, the women cry and they hug and they celebrate as if they just accomplished something grand. Oh, we did it! Of course you did it! Just like last TakeOver when you did it, and the time before that, and the time before that. Stop crying and hugging after matches. In most wrestling rivalries, the great ones, it's between two enemies, two rivals. The winner of a big match is excited. The loser of that big match is angry, and they move on. And that feeds into that suspension of disbelief that you believe these two don't like each other. The entertainment value. Stop crying and hugging after matches. The winner is excited and the loser is angry? I mean, imagine that for a concept. I'm sorry, I didn't see Roman Reigns crying and hugging Seth Rollins after he cashed in Money in the Bank and took the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. Don't remember seeing Undertaker crying and hugging anybody after any of his matches, save WrestleMania 28, where they weren't necessarily crying, but they did do that whole end of an era thing. And that was the storyline. The storyline was end of an era. These guys are going out as valiant warriors, so that played into the storyline. But that's the exception that proves the rule. That when two wrestlers wrestle in a big match, at the end of the match, the person who won the match is exuberant, and the person who lost is dejected. Let's get more of that in the NXT Women's Division. Stop patronizing them by having them hug each other and cry after every match. It's ridiculous. And it's insulting to women, I think. But I digress. In WWE, it's like they push 9 divas at once, say the word Divas Revolution a million times, and hope that you care about one of them. I said this as soon as they debuted. You know when the nerds went crazy and said this was awesome? I said this the first night out. It reminds me of that Louis C.K. bit. Who's gonna fuck all 9 of you? Louis C.K. has this bit about the 9 guys going out to get laid. It's who's gonna do all 9 of you? And that's exactly what the Divas Revolution feels like. Fans are not going to get into all 9 of these divas. Fans are not going to care about all 9 of them at once. It's not going to work that way. And you see that it struggled. It's just a big cluster. You know, they're giving divas all this great time, but it's just more time for fans to be bored. Do you hear the big pop when Lana and Summer Rae get into it? And they barely get any time, but do you hear the big pop when they get in it? They get half the time the divas do. Half the time the wrestling divas do. But when Lana and Summer Rae get in these catfights, fans go crazy. Because WWE, as clunky as that storyline has been, has actually done a good job establishing a rivalry between Lana and Summer Rae. That's a match that fans are into, that they want to see. They want to see Lana get in the ring and fight Summer Rae. They don't necessarily want to see all these divas. Why? Because WWE just says the word revolution a bunch of times. They're supposed to care? No. That's why it's not working. And it won't work. WWE really messed up by bringing all these divas up. They might have to Emma some of these girls. You know how Emma came up on the roster and it didn't work out? Some of these girls might have to go back down to NXT until WWE is ready to start calling them up one by one by one, because it's not cool. Yes, Stephanie McMahon come out and take ownership of this movement. It is just so behind the times, such old boys network stuff that like, oh, women are affluent on television now. We are in the middle of a global revolution in women's sports. What? We're not at the middle of anything. We're at the end of this. You guys are at the end of that spectrum. WWE, they live in their own bubble, so it's like they just found out about women's suffrage. You know? Like Vince McMahon, finally in the 10 seconds of free time he has, he just got to the part in American history about women's suffrage. He says, wow, they can vote? Well, let's put them on television. I mean, the divas, you need to just settle down and tell everybody's story and it'll be fine. The 9 divas at once stuff just isn't cutting it. Somebody who is cutting it is Braun Strowman. Oh, God, have you seen the sides of this man? I love me some Braun Strowman. And I love the fact that WWE is not booking him to kowtow to the internet, because I just feel like there's too many big guys these days who are jumping over the top rope or climbing to the top rope and who are working like little guys. And it's fun, and it pops the internet, and it gets them a following underground. But it's not as effective as just having a big, tough dude who doesn't come off his feet, who scares children. I love that. I think it's amazing. And I hope WWE holds out for as long as possible without A, having Braun Strowman leave his feet, and B, without having Braun Strowman become a comedy figure. Because eventually both of those things will happen. But the longer they keep Braun Strowman this strong, really, I think he should just come. Because of him, I think the Wyatts should just dominate the rest of this feud against Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns that causes frustration between those two so they can spin off into a feud of their own. I really think WWE should invest in Braun Strowman for months as just this big killing machine like they did with Kane when he first debuted. And if they did, Braun Strowman would be taken very seriously as a potential WWE World Heavyweight Championship contender. You mean to tell me if he runs through the roster for the next few months, getting better in the ring, but doing more with less, fans aren't going to buy into this guy as just a legit dominant badass? Who would you think would win in a fight, him or Seth Rollins? I don't think anybody would be that shocked if he beat Seth Rollins for the WWE title. Love this guy. Love how WWE is booking him. Always remember, subscribe to PodNasty on iTunes and YouTube. Listen to PodNasty on SoundCloud and Stitcher. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go celebrate National Labor Day. If you're going to be a bigot, why not do so in a company with no black board members, no black corporate executives, never had a black WWE champion, no black writers, and even outside of the WWE, no black journalists or columnists who regularly cover professional wrestling with the exception of me? If I quit and left for the Nation of Islam tomorrow, pro wrestling would look a lot like Duck Dynasty.